Hello and welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samuely. With me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle. So, Peter, when we last spoke, we were speaking, saying that there was grounds for cautious optimism about maybe getting to some negotiations about a 30-day ceasefire. Um, you know,
Well, maybe winding this war down. I don't want to get too close to the 30-day ceasefire thing because I think that could be a conduit for something else. But the ceasefire in and itself,
Right. No, but I think that's the thing. I mean, that would have to be the first step. I mean, it's like there would have to be a 30-day ceasefire, and that would be the foundation
yeah.
for the opening of serious negotiations. But you'd have to take that first step. Um, and I think that we were in agreement that what everyone said initially, oh, this is going to be flatly rejected. I think we agreed that's just not the Russian style. Russians wouldn't just simply flat reject. They never say no to any kind of peace proposals. They were going to come back with proposals of their own, which is what did happen. And they presented it with to Steve Witkoff. Witkoff then returned to Washington. Um, but what was striking was the tone of great friendliness and courtesy toward Trump and his people that was coming from Russia, and the contempt, bordering on just simply total disdain for the Europeans. Like they're not even part of the equation anymore. Um, and then later in the day, that same day on Friday, Trump sent out this truth, expressing his great concern about the Ukrainians who were trapped in Kursk, and pleading with Putin that they not be killed. So let's just take a look at Trump's truth that he sent out on Friday. And here we had we had very good and productive discussions with President Vladimir Putin of Russia, and there is a very good chance that this horrible bloody war can finally come to an end. And then, but at this very moment, thousands of Ukrainian troops are completely surrounded by the Russian military and in a very bad and vulnerable position. I have strongly requested to President Putin that their lives be spared. This would be a horrible massacre, one not seen since World War II. God bless them all. I do think this is a very strange message to send out. I mean, there's a fight that's taking place. It's a war on. I mean, it's this isn't civilians who are encircled. Therefore, it's up to all commanders to make the decision according to what's in their interest. Surrender or decide to shoot your way out of an encirclement. But the way he jumps in, he's making it sound as if this is some humanitarian gesture, which it isn't. These are armed forces involved in a battle. So for him to put this in this form, uppercase, but at this very moment, thousands of Ukrainian troops are completely surrounded by the Russian military and in a very bad and vulnerable position. Well, okay,
Yeah,
that's
but
that's
George,
war.
also what's missing here, he doesn't say where these troops are surrounded.
Right. No, that's right.
Okay.
That's
I
right.
mean that's kind of the whole point, isn't it?
Right, but
Okay.
yeah, no, but I mean, you're right. Of course, he doesn't say it. But it's still, it's a very strange thing. It's a completely misguided humanitarianism. I mean, that's what we had again during the time of the Bosnian War with the Srebrenica. Oh my God, these people. Well, these are armed forces. These were armed forces fighting against other armed forces. This wasn't civilians who were being targeted. But the way when you put it in this form, it sounds like the Russians have surrounded some civilians and that it's going to be a massacre. Well, there's always a very easy remedy for that, and which is what Putin said in his response. and because Putin was meeting with the permanent members of the Security Council, and he said, we know that the new administration headed by President Trump is doing everything to restore at least something of what was practically reduced to zero, destroyed by the previous American administration. This process is not easy, if not complicated. Nevertheless, as everyone knows, I had a telephone conversation with President Trump. Our Minister of Foreign Affairs had the first contacts with his American counterpart, and the Russian presidential aide, Yuri Ushakov, met with his counterpart. So in general, the situation is starting to move. Let's see what comes of it. We will deal with this topic today. And then he went on. But before we begin our work, I would like to say that we have read today's appeal by US President Mr. Trump to spare the lives of the Ukrainian army servicemen, parts of which are blocked by Russian troops in the zone of Ukrainian armed forces invasion of the Kursk region. In this regard, we draw attention to the fact that these Ukrainian militants committed numerous crimes against the civilian population in the invasion zone. These acts, as I've already said, are classified by the Prosecutor General's Office of the Russian Federation as terrorism. And then at the same time, we understand President Trump's call to be guided by humanitarian considerations with regard to these servicemen. In this regard, I would like to emphasize that if they lay down their arms and surrender, they will be guaranteed life and decent treatment in accordance with international law and the laws of the Russian Federation. In order to effectively implement the call of the President of the United States, a corresponding order from the military political leadership of Ukraine to its military units to lay down their arms and surrender is necessary. But this is really the point. You are not under any obligation to spare the lives of your adversaries. You're in a battle. You know, you don't. This isn't a humanitarian thing. Oh, we'll have a humanitarian corridor. Why should we do that? These men are armed men, and they've been fighting and killing our people. Well, why should we provide them a human? They can surrender, and then they are entitled to all of the humanitarian laws of war that prisoners of war are entitled to under the Geneva Conventions. But the idea that you just thought you're somehow obligated to spare the lives of people who haven't surrendered, it's nonsense. So Trump's tweet was really like was nonsensical, really.
Yeah, I was really surprised by it. And again, this is sovereign Russian territory. I mean, there's not much choice here. You just can't say you invade. And a lot of civilians lost their lives
Right.
in the Kursk region,
Right.
okay? And those are war crimes if they're committed against civilians, unarmed civilians at that. So Trump was kind of acting like an interloper in a place where he really shouldn't be.
No, there's no reason
And
for it.
it
Yeah.
was pointed out to him, I'm sure, with this 30-day ceasefire is that, oh, what about Kursk?
Right.
And that was one of the first things you and I talked
That's
about.
right. Yeah. Exactly. And it's something Putin brought up as well when he addressed this on last Thursday. But anyway, the scene now switches to London,
Oh,
where
you're just gonna spoil my Sunday afternoon. Okay, it's as your want is. Yes.
that's right. Yes, London, very pleasant. Or it's the Prime Minister's office, very nice part of London.
Yeah,
Um,
but these are some of the most unpleasant people in the world right now, George. Okay.
yeah,
I mean, so counterproductive.
right.
Um, uh, Intentionally wanted toward the ending of a conflict.
Right.
And we all know it's good. And I think into our, we can pat ourselves on the back. We've told everybody this is going to be really hard to wrap up,
It is
really,
very
really
hard,
hard.
extremely hard. But what is striking about the intervention of Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron, and they're the ones who are driving this, and I think the Germans as well, is then desperate to thwart this. I mean, they're pretending in public that they somehow support the Trump initiative, but they're now trying to find out how can we thwart this Trump initiative. And the way they've decided to thwart it is by inserting their forces, somehow to find some way that they can insert their forces into Ukraine, because they know there's no way Russia is going to accept anything, either a ceasefire, 30 days or any number of days, or a long-term settlement if you've got NATO forces entrenched in Ukraine. They know this, which is why they organize these conferences, which is what Keir Starmer did this weekend. The coalition of the willing, planning. This is what they're doing. They're planning deploying their forces into Ukraine, knowing that this will be an absolute deal breaker. That was the only point of this conference, a virtual conference in London, chaired by Keir Starmer.
Well, and just to lay the show the lay of the land, everyone. When Trump's people announced the 30-day ceasefire, they were all for. Yes, we demand that the
Yeah,
Russians accept. We demand. Oh, I
right,
don't know why the British Prime Minister and the French President can demand anything in any of this
right,
here. It's a mystery to me.
right.
For the very reasons that George just explained, so they can wreck it.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. And this is what so let's just take a look at what Keir Starmer said, because he did a lot of statement, a lot of speaking on Saturday. So here's the chair's statement. Leaders call on Ukraine, and then we have Keir Starmer. His statement: "We agreed now that the ball was in Russia's court." So this is already days after Russia had already thrown it back to Trump via Steve Witkoff, and essentially saying, no, it's now in your court. Show us how serious you are about this ceasefire, because that deal that you put forward is not acceptable to us. But we're ready to discuss some of the parameters where we can make some changes to that. So, but he's still, the ball's in Russia's court. So they're really saying, hey, this is really neat. This is a cool exercise. We're going to put forward this ceasefire. We're going to put in all these conditions, what we know Russia's going to say no to, and then we're going to say, it's the ball is in Putin's court. Putin is the obstacle to peace. Therefore, we need to escalate our involvement.
Well, and George, I mean, this is just intentional deception because when this statement came out, the Russians had already responded quite in
Right,
great detail, by the
right,
way, in great
right.
detail, but they're pretending they didn't hear that.
No, that's right. That's right. That's right. President Putin must prove that he's serious about peace and sign up to a ceasefire on equal terms.
Again, why is he sticking his beak into this? This is an American initiative forced upon Ukraine
Right,
and conveyed to the Russians. So
right,
what does the British Prime Minister have to do with any of this?
right, exactly. The Kremlin's dithering and delay over President Trump's ceasefire proposal and Russia's continued barbaric attacks on Ukraine run entirely counter to President Putin's stated desire for peace. And then he goes, a robust, this is the good one. They like this word, robust and credible security arrangements are the best way to ensure that any deal ends in a lasting peace. It's
Okay,
exactly
and well, see, that's a key sentence there. That's a key sentence because George and I will not argue with it. But who gets the security
right.
guarantees is the
That
problem.
exactly. But you see, what he means by security arrangement, robust and credible, is essentially he and Macron, the coalition of the willing, putting in their forces into Ukraine, which means essentially destroying any possibility of peace. I mean, there cannot be anything like that. But you see, he says these things, and then he talks about ceasefire observers, and so people get very confused, and they don't know what is he talking about. Because if you really want, peace monitors, peacekeepers, ceasefire observers, well, you can do that. You have plenty of countries in the world. You can bring in forces from Vietnam and Bangladesh and Nigeria, neutral countries. You can put them in. What isn't acceptable is for Britain, France, who are Germany, who are interested parties. Indeed, they are parties to the conflict, presenting themselves as if they're independent observers and at the same time security guarantors.
And the same countries that had been NATOizing Ukraine from after 2014 up to February 2022.
Right.
These are the same. I mean, they already have experienced people, George.
Right.
They know people that their people already know the lay of the land.
Right.
It's not new to them.
Right. Exactly. We agreed military planners would convene again. Military planners would convene again in the UK this week to progress practical plans for how our militaries can support Ukraine's future security. What has that got to do with a peace agreement? What has that got to do with a ceasefire deal? We agreed military planners would convene again this week to progress practical plans for how our militaries can support
Well,
Ukraine's future
but see,
security.
I mean, at least they're not blowing smoke in our face. I mean, they may not realize it. See, this is one of the things that George and I have been talking about for so long. You know, reconstruction for Ukraine, integration of Ukraine into European institutions, and George and I have always pushed back. But there's something called the war going on here. I mean, everybody wants to jump over here. You
That's
don't want
right.
to deal with this.
Well, there's a war going on, and that has to be brought to an end. So this whole thing about the lasting peace. No, you've got to first of all come up with some kind of a plan that both sides can agree on. Then you can get onto the issue of the implementation. But they don't want to do that. They don't ever want to discuss that. They just start talking about as if they're discussing an implementation of a peace plan that doesn't even exist. But in reality, they're just talking about, hey, how do we put our forces into Ukraine and thereby make sure that there'll be no agreement? I mean, it's so
I mean, why don't you send civil servants? I mean, why do you have to send the military?
right.
I mean, again, I mean, what does the military do? They fight wars, okay? Um, uh, Obviously, the Russian side would see that as just continued
Yeah,
NATOization
of course
of
it will.
Ukraine that they saw after the illegal transfer of power in February of 2014. They keep singing from the
Right.
same hymn sheet.
Exactly. That's right. We will build up Ukraine's own defenses and armed forces and be ready to deploy as a coalition of the willing in the event of a peace deal. So again, he says these things, and it kind of gives you a headache because it's just so lacking any rationality. We will build up Ukraine's own defenses and armed forces and be ready to deploy as a coalition of the willing in the event of a peace deal. Well, which is it? I mean, it's Ukraine's armed forces, or you're going to be deploying yourself in there.
We
But he
will
says it in the
build
same
we
sentence.
we will build up Ukraine's own defenses and armed forces and be ready to deploy as a coalition of the. What have you been doing for the last 10 years?
Exactly. Exactly.
What have you been doing?
Exactly. And he's basically, he's not making any breaks. He just continue with the same policy. So what? So all this urgency, this online conference, a coalition of willing. What's the urgency? Why suddenly you have to do all this? Well, because there is negotiations taking place between Washington and Moscow, and they're trying to figure out how can we thwart this and make sure that nothing happens. So they have the sudden hysteria of these endless meetings, meeting in Paris and a meeting in London, now a virtual meeting. Constantly, it's like every 2 or 3 days, there's another meeting. What's the urgency? They have to thwart this.
Keep in mind, everyone, they're not part
Yeah.
of any negotiations. I mean, so why are you planning on something where you're not even at the table? You have no idea the exchange of the give and takes, new ideas, whatever happens with the Trump team and the Russian team.
Right.
You're not even at the table, and you're making decisions based on what
Right.
information?
Yes. That's right. That's right. To help secure Ukraine on the land, at sea, and in the sky.
Oh yeah, well here we go with the Churchill
That's
language.
right, exactly. In the
I'm
event of a
surprised he
cease,
didn't say on the beaches and on the streets.
that's
Okay.
right. That's right. Then he switches over and start talking about a ceasefire. So 1 minute he's talking about this lasting peace. Now it's a ceasefire. In the event of a ceasefire, we emphasize the need for a strong monitoring arrangements to ensure that any violations of a deal are identified and called out. Does
You
anyone
haven't
really
been
believe?
invited. You haven't been
You
invited.
haven't been invited,
Why
but
are you inserting yourself?
but
What right do you have to insert yourself?
right. Does anyone really believe that the British are going to identify and call out Ukrainian violations of a ceasefire? I mean, it's like, you're taking people for idiots that they're going to think, oh, well, the British are going to be independent monitors. Yeah, well, it's going to be balls and strikes. Whoever breaks the ceasefire, we're going to identify them, call them out, bring it before the UN Security Council. I'm quite sure Sir Keir will do that. Um, and then he goes, we agreed that in the case that President Putin refused to agree on an immediate and unconditional ceasefire, which he's already refused, and anyone would, of course, refuse, we would need to increase our efforts to strengthen Ukraine, weaken Russia's war machine, and ratchet up pressure on President Putin to convince him to come to the negotiating table. In other words, you present him with a demand that is obviously unacceptable. Who the hell accepts immediate and unconditional, essentially surrender, immediate and unconditional ceasefire? Well, if he says no, then we will increase our efforts to strengthen Ukraine, weaken Russia's war machine, ratchet up pressure on President Putin to come to the negotiating table. So in other words, you're going to do everything that you've already been doing and then some.
Well, I mean, if they were serious to any degree about this, why don't they just send forces now?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah,
Just do it
go.
now.
Yeah,
Go.
do it now.
Stop
Exactly.
talking so
That's
much.
right. Do it. Do it. That's absolutely right. All this talk. It's like those who say, "Oh, Ukraine is in the front line of fighting for our values, for democracy, for
Well, then,
freedom."
yeah, well, then, put some skin in the game.
Right.
Big guy, put
Exactly.
some skin in the game.
Exactly. Do it. No one's stopping you. Go do it. See how you fare. But then, oh no, well, Ukraine is going to do the fighting. We'll stay in the background. It's like, the two of you fight it out. I'll hold your jacket for you. Um, to deliver this, we will accelerate our military support. So this is in the event that President Putin refuses to accept an immediate and unconditional ceasefire. Who's going to accept an immediate and unconditional ceasefire
When you're winning,
when you're winning?
when
Um,
the Ukrainian soldiers are encircled in Kursk.
right,
What is Sir Keir going to do? Take his shoe off and start banging the table? That's what it sounds like to me.
yes, yes. Um, tight, accelerate our military support, tighten our sanctions on Russia's revenues, and continue to explore all lawful routes to ensure that Russia pays for the damage it has done to Ukraine. So we're back on the frozen assets. And this is all if they say no to an immediate unconditional ceasefire. This is all still back to that whole thing, the ceasefire plan of last Tuesday. And they say, oh, he's got to accept it. So it's a take it or leave it. Well, why should Russia accept it? Why should anyone
I have
accept,
I,
just as a take it or leave it? Who are you to declare anything is take it or leave it?
Do you think that the Trump people are going to, at some point in very soon, just make it clear to the coalition of the willing, knock it off? Do you think that could happen?
Um, I don't know. I think he's being. I think he hasn't figured this out yet. I mean, I think he still likes the idea of being the head man of the Western alliance. But so
Well, but that's my point, George. He is the head man
he is
of
the
the
head
West.
man. That's why he doesn't want
Donald
to.
Trump is the head man,
So yeah,
and Sir Keir and Emmanuel, these are like gnats around a fly,
right.
and it's getting annoying.
It's
Okay,
extremely. It's extreme.
Because what Trump is proposing, and George and I are not convinced we even know that he knows what
Right.
he's proposing
Right.
here. But it's his baby,
Right. Right.
okay?
Right.
And considering the disdain that he has for these European leaders.
Right.
I think that at some point he's just going to say, we need to clear the air. That means you shut up for a change.
Well, he should, because what the Europeans are now doing is precisely sabotaging his plan. Now, maybe he hasn't quite figured out that that's their ploy. That's what they're trying to do. They want to basically make sure it's stillborn, that it never gets anywhere. Because the more they come out with these sorts of statements, the more likely is that the Russians are going to say, "Well, this is a non-starter." Because
Yeah,
even if Trump were to say, "You know what? For 30 days we won't provide any military hardware to Ukraine. Okay, just to keep you happy. For 30 days we won't do it." The Europeans are not making this pledge. So that's what they say. Starmer's already going ahead with these military plans. So it doesn't even matter now at this stage if Trump says, okay, we won't provide it for 30 days. The Europeans are saying, well, it doesn't apply to
yeah,
us.
but see, one of the accusations that are made against people that want peace is that you're repeating Kremlin talking points. Okay. That's one strategy, and it still happens to this day. But the greatest asset that the Russians have in all of this is their patience. They're watching. They're watching the Americans and the French and the Germans are all squabbling among themselves, okay? And that's just fine with me, okay? But in the meantime, young men are being
Right,
destroyed, okay?
right,
Because you want to score some kind of rhetorical point. You
right.
have there's the capacity of the European NATO countries, with the exception of Turkey, which is they have their own problems to deal with in their
Right,
part of the world.
right.
NATO is not something that is a coherent military organization without the United States. As George and I have said over and over again, okay, French troops and British troops going to Ukraine, how are they going to get there? Do they have a fleet of planes that can carry troops in all of this? Maybe they have one or two, okay, but they don't have the
No, they don't have the,
capacity.
no, they don't have the, but the very fact that they're keeping this open will ensure that there's no deal. There can't be a deal under these circumstances. I mean, for the Russians, even if Trump were to say we Americans will not deliver any more arms for 30 days, the British, the French, the Germans,
Well,
they haven't made that
I
pledge.
think that if Trump puts his mind to it,
He can. I agree.
that can and will
If he
happen.
puts, yeah,
Will he
absolutely.
do it?
If
Is the
exactly, that's
question.
that's the question. If he puts his mind to it, absolutely, he can put his foot down.
The reason why I bring it up, George, is that Trump has owned this, okay? And George and I cautioned him, be careful because it's going to become your
Right.
problem,
Right.
okay? Now, Trump did a little fancy dancing in the Oval Office with Zelensky, and very few people picked up on it. But Trump went from the United States being the major supporter of Ukraine to we are going to mediate the end of this. That is
Right.
a huge
Right.
shift.
Right.
And
Right.
Trump, you better, if your words become hollow or you lose momentum, then it's
Right.
just going to be Biden's war under
Becomes
your
Trump's
watch.
right. No, I think there's a very good chance of this happening
Oh,
because
I do.
this could
George and I are the
yeah,
only
right,
two, at least that I know of,
right.
that we have always said, sorry to interrupt, but escalation is still
Right.
on the cards everywhere.
That's right. That's exactly right. And even in the tone of that message that he sent out about that Russia is under some sort of an obligation to spare the lives of these Ukrainian soldiers shows a deeply wrong-headed approach to this war. That somehow Russia is under some kind of an obligation to spare the lives of Ukrainian soldiers. What way? It's an obligation to follow the international laws of war, but it's under no obligation to allow forces just to withdraw with their arms and then say, "Well, thank you, goodbye. We'll go redeploy somewhere else." I mean, well, that's not how you fight wars. So, but the fact that he sent it out there indicates that he could easily just turn on a dime and decide, well, Russia are the villains and Russia are the ones that I have to apply pressure against. We just don't know
Well,
how he's gonna play this.
everybody, when reality seeps in, it can really bite because remember the Kursk caper that Zelensky backed, and the American, they knew all about it. There's nothing in the Ukrainian military on that scale happens without Western knowledge and support. Okay, so that was supposed to be positioning Ukraine to be able to trade land for land, right? Well, now what we've gotten down to is that there's going to be many, many thousand, I don't know the number, of Ukrainian troops that are going to be captured. Okay, and now it'll who's got the upper hand when it came to the Kursk caper? It'll be the
Right.
Russians, not the Ukrainians.
Right. Um, so, and then here, Starmer goes on,
Oh,
and here the Prime Minister held a call with international leaders in the coalition of the willing this morning. And I think,
who are these international leaders?
yeah, well, I think there
What
was,
import do they have?
yeah, the usual crowd. And yeah, but you had Australians taking part in this and New Zealanders. This is the coalition of the willing. I think what this week has shown, particularly the developments and progress on Tuesday, is that President Zelensky, who is with us this morning, has shown once again that Ukraine is the party of peace because he has agreed to and committed to a 30-day unconditional ceasefire. Kind of a non sequitur. And then he goes, now what we see, and this is the centerpiece of our discussion today, is that Putin is the one trying to delay.
No, he's not trying to delay anything. He wants clarification of what
Exactly.
this means. That's all.
That's right. And in a sense, and you all know this, if Putin is serious about peace, it's very simple. He has to stop this barbaric attacks on Ukraine and agree to a ceasefire. No,
Well,
he doesn't
what
have to.
about the British government's position in Istanbul? What was their commitment to peace?
And my feeling is that sooner or later, Putin is going to have to come to the table and engage in serious discussions. I always thought
Why?
this. This is back to the whole this thing about we have to keep supplying weapons to Ukraine because that's the way, that's the fastest way that Putin's going to come to the negotiating table. So you're back to the same thing. After all this talk about ceasefire and peace, oh, Putin's going to have to come to the table. So it's like we are going to force him to come to the table. Well, that hasn't worked out for you so far. So why you're still coming up with this nonsense? Or will you keep doing what we're doing? Sooner or later, he's going to have to come to the table. Well, when this sooner or later, how many more people are going to die during this sooner or later?
And this is also a non sequitur. And my feeling, okay, I don't know why you would use that word, but okay. And my feeling is that sooner or later, Putin is going to have to come to he already was at the table.
Right, right,
Okay. Why should he, what's the incentive for them to come back
right.
to the table?
That's
You
right.
buffoon.
Right. But, and this is a big but, for us this morning in our meeting, we can't sit back and simply wait for that to happen. We have to keep pushing ahead, pushing forward, and preparing for peace. We must prepare for peace. And how are we going to prepare for peace? Well, strengthening Ukraine, and the peace that will be secure and that will last. And I think that means strengthening Ukraine so they can defend themselves, strengthening, obviously, military capability in terms of funding and in terms of provision of further support from all of us to Ukraine. So we're preparing for peace by going to war. This is the sort of lunacy that these people are inhabiting.
Yeah, but I mean,
I mean, Stoltenberg got this down to a T, but Starmer, it's even more insane in the world of Starmer.
well, this again, and a peace that will be secure and that will last. And I think that means strengthening Ukraine so it can defend themselves and strengthen, obviously, in terms of military capacity, et cetera, et cetera. So does this mean, George, forever war? Because
Yes,
that's what it sounds like.
right. That's right. Forever war. How many millions are you planning on dying? I mean, what's the plan? I mean, but no one ever asked Starmer any such question. Like, well, what's the plan here? What's the million? Another million get killed? 2 million, 3 million? What at what point? Do you think that I think it's time to call it a day, or do you just want to keep doing this because we have to teach Putin a lesson or whatever it is?
Embedded in, I mean, I can't read his mind. And if I could, I probably wouldn't, I'd probably be horrified. But I mean, does he think Ukraine's going to win?
It's a very good question. You never know with all the when Stoltenberg and Annalena Baerbock and all of these things when they keep talking with this usual Putin is going to have to come to the table. Is that what you think? Ukraine is somehow going to win this war? I mean, then and if he does think that, you really should explain what's the scenario? How do how do we get there that Ukraine actually wins this war? Um, Secondly, being prepared to defend any deal ourselves through a coalition of the willing. We've begun that process this morning and we can take it forward.
But you're not part of the deal.
No. Thirdly, and very importantly, given the developments of the past few days, to keep the pressure on Putin to come to the table. And I think that collectively we've got a number of ways that we can do that.
Okay, still waiting for the punchline.
That's right. But I mean, it's like, first of all, they say, oh, we're going to come to the table. And then, but at the same time, they're saying, oh, Putin is refusing to accept an unconditional ceasefire as we're demanding. I thought you said Putin was going to come to the table. I mean, so which is it? Putin is about to come to the negotiating table, or Putin is unwilling to talk peace. You got to you got to go with one story or the other. Which one is it? He's not
Well,
serious about peace, or he's going to come to the negotiating table if we just hit him a little harder.
well, it's kind of like you must come to the negotiating table. How dare you come to the negotiating table? I mean,
Yeah,
what do you want?
right. Um,
Because in their mind, they must come to the negotiating table to surrender.
That's right.
That's
Exactly. Exactly. They come to surrender, and again, then you have to ask, what's the mechanics? Why would they surrender? Why just from one day to the next they said, wait, yeah, we're gonna capitulate. Um, Anyways, and it says, and so it's those three areas we'll focus on in this meeting: strengthening Ukraine, being prepared to defend any deal ourselves through a coalition of the willing, and keeping that pressure on Russia at this crucial time. Where's the peace part? I'm still missing the peace agreement. What are the terms of this deal? Strengthening Ukraine, being prepared to defend any deal ourselves through a coalition of the willing, and keeping the pressure on Russia. And that's what this meeting is about. Well, that's useful. I'm sure glad we got this meeting done. I mean, you've come up with so many new ideas here. And then here we have the Guardian report from Starmer. Today, I hosted a call with counterparts from across Europe, as well as the NATO Secretary General and leaders of the EU Commission. Oh, that's Kaya Kallas, Ursula, EU Council, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. How does Australia and New Zealand get in on this? To discuss our support for Ukraine. We underlined our unwavering commitment to stand shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine, while at the same time we're not a party to the conflict. Both now and long into the future. We welcome the efforts of President Trump, President Zelensky, and their negotiating teams to secure the remarkable breakthrough on the peace agreement in Jeddah this week, and President Zelensky's commitment to the U.S. proposal for an immediate and unconditional 30-day ceasefire subject to
oh
agreements.
yeah, well that's just the tongue bath. That doesn't mean anything.
But I like it, the way they're obviously trying to undermine Trump, but they don't dare to, so they have to say we welcome the efforts of President Trump.
No, they
Um,
don't.
no,
Everything
no,
he says,
absolutely
he
not. Yeah,
doesn't.
and then we agreed that now the ball was in Russia's court. Wow. And President Putin must prove he's serious about peace and sign up to a ceasefire on equal terms.
Who I'm sorry, the coalition of the willing don't have that doesn't have that
No,
kind
I
of
don't
power.
think so. I mean, I wonder what those New Zealanders, those are the ones I'm really worried about. The Kremlin's dithering and delay over President Trump's ceasefire proposal and Russia's continued barbaric attacks on Ukraine run entirely counter to President Putin's stated desire for peace. We reaffirmed our commitment to Ukraine's long-term security and agreed that Ukraine must be able to defend itself and deter future Russian aggression. But still nothing here about peace. Just how do we keep this war going for a little bit longer? Robust and credible security arrangements are the best way to ensure that any deal ends in a lasting peace. We agreed military planners would convene again in the UK this week to progress practical plans for how our militaries can support Ukraine's future security. We will build up Ukraine's own defenses and armed forces and be ready to deploy as a coalition of the willing in the event of a peace deal. So that's the Starmer plan. So there's going to be more of these meetings this week, and really there's something so disgusting about this.
I have to make a public service announcement right now. Right now, I can't guarantee George and I are going to talk about all these meetings. I mean, if this is the caliber.
We can't do all of them because they're taking place now.
This is just blowhards, okay?
Yeah.
They have no idea what they're doing. They have no idea. We know this. They're not satisfied that Trump has broken ranks.
Right.
They're not satisfied that Ukraine didn't get what it wants, and it's not satisfied that Russia hasn't been defeated yet.
Right.
I'm sorry, everyone. The peace plan has nothing to do with their desires.
No. But this is very interesting because ultimately, let's say they get some kind of a ceasefire done. Now, right away, they're going to start moving their forces in some form or other. Maybe not a major airlift, but some few French gendarmes or whatever, and some British soldiers are going to be sent in. But that's just simply the advance party. And then let's say they're talking seriously about a peace agreement. The only thing Starmer and Angelina and the rest of them are talking about is, well, how can we sabotage this? That's the only thing that's in their mind. How can we do something to make sure this doesn't happen? They're totally wedded to this idea of just keeping this war going. And why it's so disgusting is that it's other people. They're basically signing off on the loss of lives of other people. They're not sacrificing anything themselves. It's other people who are going to be dying. And that's why it's so repellent listening to this, that,
and they want to spend money that they don't have. They want to have bond issues that I don't know if anybody's going to be particularly interested in, to be honest with you, George.
Right.
I mean, the European Union is drowning in debt right now.
Right.
And now you want to break all your budgetary rules, particularly in Germany,
right,
which was sacrosanct up until 15 seconds ago.
Right.
Towards what end? What is your goal?
Right.
Except for, and it's a theme that George and I have touched upon in the past, is that this is an organizing principle. COVID was one. Concentrating more power into Brussels, taking sovereignty away from member states, and now they've got the magic bullet. It's the militarization of Europe, which will take even more sovereignty away from each country. And what we've been seeing in Romania, which I think is a harbinger for the future. We don't like politicians. We don't like political parties. Well, zap, you're gone. And that's coming from Brussels. Okay.
Yep.
So, I mean, it has nothing to do with Ukraine and its security. I mean, for God's sake, if they cared about that country and their people, they would have agreed to Istanbul. They would have implemented Minsk. Okay. I mean, Ukraine, haven't you figured out that these are not your friends?
Right. Yeah, exactly. These are not your friends. You're absolutely right. I mean, that's the thing, that if you cared about these people, your first instinct would be, how do we spare their lives? How do we make sure that thousands upon thousands of young men are not sent to the slaughter, just so that they'll be able to go on with their lives? This was a logic people used to be able to understand and say, this is a pointless struggle. You're just throwing away lives on a fight that you cannot win. I mean, when Eisenhower said, we're not going to support the Hungarians in 56, that was his humanitarian concern, not because he liked Khrushchev or Soviet Union. He said, this is stupid. The Hungarians are just going to waste their lives on a fight that they cannot win. And the same with Czechoslovakia. We can't support you. It's a fight you cannot win. You're not going to defeat the Soviet Union. We don't want tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of your people lives just being thrown away.
George, over the years, we've both come across the question of why did European leaders and governments during the trench warfare of World War I, what was the mindset of sending men to the
Okay.
meat grinder? Because Europe had never seen that kind of
No,
human loss in wars. I mean, wars were very short. They were
exactly.
very decisive.
Right.
The winner and loser was pretty
Right.
obvious from the get-go.
Right.
Okay. And then it all changed in
Right.
August 1914. And it went on for 4 years.
And
And it was just a bloodbath that the world had never seen before
that's right.
because it was
And what
mechanized
was
war. Okay.
interesting as well is that during that time there was some diplomacy taking place. And when you think or read about the diplomacy, it should have been fairly easy to come to an agreement, but they absolutely refused to because in this case, the English and the French were absolutely determined to inflict a lasting defeat on Germany. So I mean, Germans who I think were saying, "Let's return to the status quo ante" in September
And that
1914.
was the norm for
That's
European
right.
diplomacy at the
That's right.
time.
Yeah. And so no, no, no. This is our opportunity, and they were determined. When Wilson asked both parties, send me your war aims, and then once you tell me your war aims, then we can see if we can maybe meet halfway. And they couldn't do it. They couldn't come up with anything that sort of
Well,
resembled achievable war aims.
but see, George, you just said it. It's the most operative idea, and what you just said is because the France and the UK wanted to inflict a absolute defeat,
On Germany.
crushing defeat of Germany, which again was not part of the norm of warfare and
Right.
diplomacy in Europe for
Right.
a good 100 years. We can go even further back if you want, but that's exactly what Europe wants to do to
Right.
Russia.
Exactly.
And Ukraine is the conduit. It's not for the 1 millionth time. This has nothing to do with Ukraine.
Right.
And that's what's so shameful about these people, because they invoke it all of the time. That's what's shameful about Zelensky as well. Okay. I mean, this guy is like a thermometer. He's up and down. I mean, it's ridiculous even to analyze it because it's all over the place. But their aim is to destroy Russia, not defeat Russia, destroy it and
That's
break
right.
it up.
That's right. That's exactly right. Defeat isn't enough.
Defeat isn't
The
enough, right?
defeat isn't enough. The overthrow of Putin isn't enough. It has to, the whole country has to be dismantled from, bit by bit, and so that there's nothing left of Russia. That's the aim. It's like, what they tried to do and seem quite close to achieving in the 90s, they are determined to accomplish now. That's why they intend to keep this war going. They somehow think that at some point they will reach it, when that mythical moment when Putin will come to the negotiating table because the country is
Yeah, it'll be
disintegrating.
like the representative of the Japanese emperor on the USS Missouri.
Right.
That's what they want.
That's right. That's it. And that's the plan. And that's why what are they doing now? They're whipping up this anti-Russian hysteria. This is Britain. I mean, the British press is just unreadable. It's
Yeah.
so insane with all the stories they're telling about Russia. Pretty much they're about to invade. They're about to invade the British Isles. I mean, what Hitler couldn't achieve, the Russians are going to achieve. They're going to just invade the British Isles. Well, we talked about Macron last week. Got the Germans. I mean, it's a point of insanity. But that's the only way that they can keep this war going, because at some point people are going to get fed up.
But everyone, again, you're being forced to be drowned in this ridiculous propaganda. The UK, it's just psychopathic now. I mean, you read it, you don't know if to laugh or cry. Okay,
Right.
it is so, it's just so beyond what's happening on the ground. But during the Cold War, Stephen F. Cohen, God bless his soul, he used to always remind us, put yourself in the other guy's shoes. Okay, that's how we got out of the Cold War,
Right.
everybody. Okay,
Right.
but even worse. what do the Russians see? You have little Emmanuel acting like a little Napoleon. You have Sir Keir trying to act like Winston Churchill. What do the Russians think?
Right.
Well, the Grand Army came to Russia, went all the way to Moscow, burned it to the
Right.
ground,
Right.
okay? And then there was another coalition of the willing. It was Nazi Germany's coalition of the willing.
Right.
And they made it almost all the way to Moscow. So what is different? Why should the Russians see this any differently than the Napoleonic coalition, the Nazi coalition?
Right.
It's all the same. It's threatening their existence. Why wouldn't they act the way they are? It's just common sense if you know history.
Yeah, no, that's right. That's right. I remember, it's really funny because I remember a debate between Stephen Cohen and Anne Applebaum, and Anne Applebaum continued to insist that, of course, NATO poses no threat whatever to Russia. I mean, that's the line that they take. Oh, the only thing Putin is worried about is democracy. That's all. He's not. And Cohen, I think, was explaining, yeah, but you got a hostile military alliance that just keeps moving towards your borders. Yeah, you kind of start getting very, very right. Oh no, NATO has always said is defensive. NATO,
Oh yeah,
and Cohen said it doesn't matter what you say. It's your actions that speak for you. So the Russians aren't interested in what NATO actually says about itself. It's NATO's actions that
yeah. I
Russia
mean,
pays
everyone.
attention
If
to.
if if an arsonist moves into your neighborhood, three streets down and 15 houses down, and over a course of a certain amount of time, every single house has been burned down, and then it's your house.
That's right.
So why would you think that the arsonist is going to leave you alone?
Right. Right.
Okay. Again, I really want to go back to the organizing principle. Napoleon had an organizing principle to, fighting autocracy, fighting backwardness, okay, fighting religion and conservatism, okay. Well, the Nazis had their own racial
Right.
interpretation and that would be and it was an organizing principle for the Nazis.
Right.
And we have this, so we have neoliberalism, the rules-based order and all that. It's all the same thing. It's called something different,
Right.
but it's always an organizing principle for power.
Right.
Okay. And if you dissent from it, well, you're aiding and abetting the enemy. It's always these false binaries all of the time.
Yep.
Okay. And there's no room for these people, no room at all, to come to some kind of an agreement, which, I've said time and again on this podcast, is that's an anomaly to how great powers function through history.
Well, but the thing is that what Starmer, just going through the way Starmer is describing, he is laying down the conditions for a permanent war. He wants Europe to be on a permanent war footing against Russia. There's nothing there in all the things that we were talking about, and all that verbiage, to suggest that he and his friends are ready to for some kind of a modus vivendi with Russia. No, we're going to use this negotiations, ceasefire, peace deal to lay the foundation for a permanent war against Russia. We're going to move into Ukraine, entrench ourselves in Ukraine, build it up as a kind of giant
What?
NATO, hardware shop. For what? To continue this fight against Russia. That's what Starmer is offering. And you can say that it's insane. And the only way you can do it is by whipping up this hysteria about Russia, which is what the British are doing and what the French are doing. Because how else are you going to persuade a public that you're doing anything other than laying the groundwork for another 50-year or 100-year war against Russia?
Yeah, and all of this is done in a vacuum. George and I have pointed out the usual cast of characters that attend these meetings, if it's real and in person or virtual. This is like a bad sitcom, okay? The same cast of
Right.
characters come out. They're all banal. They're all
Right.
they're all cardboard like,
Right.
cartoonish like. Meanwhile, everyone, the Russians read every single thing they say. And
Right.
so we're deemed the enemy. We have to react. We have to react accordingly.
Right.
Okay? And that's what's happening. If someone says we don't want peace with you, we
Right.
want to destroy you, then you take them at their word, don't you?
I
Okay.
think
I mean, that's not a
exactly,
mystery.
and exactly right. And so when they say, "Oh, we're entirely defensive," what in any way that Starmer said that there was anything defensive? There's nothing defensive here. He's preparing for a 50 or 100-year war against Russia. There's nothing defensive here. So it's a giant lie that the NATO, which is defensive. That's why we're moving our forces right on Russia's borders, because we're so defensive. Because that's what defensive people do. They move their forces right into your neighbor's front lawn because we're just defending ourselves. That's why we're here on your front lawn.
Well,
Uh,
also, there's an element of the banality of evil in all of this here, is that somehow just money that you don't have, money that you're going to print, money that you're going to borrow, money that you're going to steal,
yeah,
that somehow will solve this. That's not going to solve this for them
yeah,
at all. And from what I'm very cautious. George and I are very cautious. I'm not a military person. George isn't a military person, but I do talk to some military people, and they said, all of them have said to me, and they've had their issues about how the SMO has been proceeding, but they said the tempo is going to pick up now. And what is the West going to do? What are you going to do? The more that you dither, because that's what they claim that the Russians are, the more that you dither, the worse it gets for Ukraine and their demographic catastrophe that they're
right,
facing.
right.
In no way can this be good. I mean, giving Ukraine money so it can be squandered, can be stolen, or buy weapons that haven't even been made yet.
Right. No, I
I
think
mean,
that's
this
right.
is just, I
No,
mean,
that,
this
yeah,
the logistic. If you just focus on the logistics of it all, it
right.
doesn't make any
But
sense.
this is what's striking about Russia's response. Why Russia, I think, made a very temperate response to the ceasefire proposal, because the Russians didn't say, "Well, we've already laid down our conditions for a ceasefire back in June of last year, with the complete withdrawal of Ukraine from the four oblasts and a commitment to no Ukraine membership of NATO ever, ever." Russia didn't respond like that. That they didn't say, "Oh, let's just go back." So that already shows that Russians were taking seriously this proposal. They're obviously not going to accept immediate and unconditionally, but at least they showed that the Russians were actually taking this seriously and say, "Yeah, we're ready to work something out, or at least begin the process of working something out," as opposed to Starmer and his friends who say, "Well, how can we make sure that nothing is worked out? How can we make sure that we put so many obstacles in the way that we won't get anywhere?" And everyone will be stupid enough to blame Russia for everything. They're not going to notice what we've just been doing. They're just going to blame everything on Russia because we're so clever and
Yeah, well,
we
I'll
can
just show you
outmaneuver
the
everyone.
lack of cleverness is Trump has initiated, rightly, I think, reestablishing a modicum of relations with Russia. Okay, will they ever be good? Probably not.
No,
Can they be civil? Well, I think that's achievable. But Russia's made a huge concession in accepting Trump's gambit
right,
because American weapons with American intelligence are killing Russians.
right,
What government does that? I
right,
think that is an amazing step of goodwill,
right.
of willingness to communicate in trying to resolve a problem that the US government was fully behind. Okay, talk about being magnanimous, George. That's huge.
Yeah, yeah, that's right, that's right. Yeah,
Joe, I want to say something because I don't want. I was thinking about it and I wanted to talk about it on this morning, but I forgot. One thing that Russia has achieved, it is returned to the pantheon of great powers because we have the collapse of the Soviet Union and then you could call generously the wilderness years of the 1990s and early aughts. But Russia's opinion does count again. in a very important way. Remember Mark earlier this morning saying how, how stupid it is to sanction a country that is the major exporter of raw
Right.
materials,
Yeah.
and he didn't add agriculture, but I would. I mean, just the insanity of it all. Russia took a break from the great power structure, and now it's back. And that has been one of the goals of Russia, not to create the Soviet Union again, no, not to have an empire, no. As I pointed out before, Kyrgyzstan, for example, they would love to become part of the Russian Federation. They would like to be. And the Russians said, no, you're going to have to go on your own, at least for now. Okay. I mean, am I overstating my position?
Well, I think that what Russia needs to do, it has to end this war, because I think
Yeah,
as long as you've got this war and you're not able to bring it to a successful conclusion, that is constantly draining your power. I mean, that's as we've talked about many times before, you're a great power when you're not in a war. You can threaten war and you can coerce others, but as long as you're not draining your resources, then you're a great power. So that's why I think it's what's really important, and I think the Russian leaders realize this. They need to bring this war to as rapid a conclusion as possible, as quickly as possible. And so that's why. But as long as it goes on, it's a drain on Russia, and still dangerous. I mean, we're not out of the woods yet. I mean,
we're not out of the
talked
woods.
about dangers of World War III and everything. Just because things have now improved between Russia and the United States, we're not out of the woods. This could again, as long as the war is continuing and the Western powers are committed as they are, we're still in a very dangerous situation.
I agree. I agree.
So
I mean,
I have a question though, for you, as though it seems like Keith Kellogg is back, or what's this?
yeah, he's back, but his profile, I think originally he was, correct me if I'm wrong, but he was the envoy for Ukraine and Russia.
Oh, is that the
Now,
difference? Now,
yeah,
oh, I
I think
see.
that was his original mandate.
Oh, I
Now
see.
it's just Ukraine, which is kind of, I know that's kind of like, third place white ribbon. Okay, I mean it's in a pat in the back on the
Right.
back. He's intensely pro-Ukrainian. Okay,
Right.
and so
You're right, because just being an envoy to Ukraine, that's kind of a demotion, because
oh yeah, that's like a bowl of spit. Okay,
because that's not really where the action is. I mean, the action is
no,
negotiations with Russia. So if you're the envoy to Ukraine, you're kind of out of the loop where the major decisions and
because
negotiations are taking.
Ukraine isn't part of the process.
Right, right. Yes.
Okay, so I mean maybe a babysitter. I don't know
It
how
sounds
well
like a
it's
babysitter.
remunerate. Maybe it pays well. I
Right,
don't know.
right.
Um, uh, but uh, also, I mean, it's news reports. I'll take it at face value. Okay, that the Russians didn't want to deal with him. That may
Yeah.
be true. I don't know. I don't know. Okay.
Yeah, so he got the consolation prize. It's it's not much of a prize, because it's just that there's just no there are no negotiations taking place with Ukraine. I mean, it's a
No, because Ukraine can't negotiate. It has no
right,
leverage.
right, yeah, yeah. And then the other thing I want to ask you about is, what did you think of that tweet sent out by former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev?
Well, I can remember when Medvedev was president, and um, how to put it, he wasn't taken very seriously by people. Okay, and
At the
that's
time,
not
at the
his
time he
fault.
was president. Yeah,
And it's not his fault because Putin is not the largest man in the world, but he has huge political shoes.
right,
Okay,
right,
and he never fit into them. And then George and I off and on, and it's mostly because it's levity. I mean, Medvedev is this like bulldog
right,
on Twitter, which nobody here thinks of him as being that, except for when he's on Twitter. So it's
right,
kind of like a little bit of cosplay, I suppose.
right.
But
But the
I
thing,
think what his you mean stuff it in where it came out,
Exactly.
right?
That's the one. Yeah,
Okay.
that's the one. He sent it
I
in
just
English.
think,
Mostly he does them in Russian on Telegram. This was on Twitter and in English.
well, this is the alter ego approach, okay? Because when Marco Rubio and Waltz they announced the 30-day ceasefire, the attitude here was this is outrageous.
Right.
I mean, it's insulting.
Right.
Naive. You actually think we're going to go for this? Now, of course, Putin and Lavrov will smooth it over. That's their style. That's the
Right.
style of Russian diplomacy. They can't be otherwise. But the visceral response, it was all channeled to Medvedev.
Right.
That's what people really think.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Right. But he was responding to the British, who and I think
Good, good. And it's again, the disdain for the Europeans,
yeah, but
right?
it's particularly the British. And I think with him, I think the British kind of get his goat up more than anyone else. I mean that's so. And I think it's my recollection. It was the British who said that Russia has to accept it immediately and
It must.
unconditionally.
It
Must the
must.
must, yeah, must accept this immediately and unconditionally. And I think that's when he, went off in this. It's a very
Because there is a differentiation here. Zakharova and Medvedev and then you have the Russian version of Fox News, which is very patriotic. They like to make fun of the continental Europeans. They make fun of them. With the British, they return the loathing. And what they're doing, it is a separate strategy.
right,
Okay.
right. It's very interesting that the why exactly they loathe the British so much. I think there is it goes back to some historic suspicion and fear and anger at the British because if during the Stalinist show trials and when people were confessing to all kinds of
It's
amazing
always
things.
British
It's
intelligence.
always British intelligence. We're always meeting agents of British intelligence in this particular hotel and that hotel and everything. But it was always the British. It was never the Americans, not even the Germans. Always the British were plotting against the
And also,
Union.
all through, well, particularly when the 5-year plans were instituted and the enforced industrialization, which was horrifically violent and damaging in many ways. A country the size of Russia, Russia is vast. It is so vast. And then the British Isles, which geographically isn't a big place, okay. Historically, it was a major power, maybe the greatest power for a while there. But the Soviets always said, we have just as many telephones as
Right,
the UK. We
right,
have just as many refrigerators. It was never Germany. It was never the United States. The referent was always the UK.
right,
Okay.
right.
And it's part of it's the way I look at it in the contemporary time is that the British they know they've been demoted. They're not at the main table anymore. They can't determine the menu. Often, more and more often, they're going to be on the menu. But Russia, they snookered the British because they're on top. Again, this is a resurgence. As they see themselves diminish in power, their rhetoric gets more toxic and
Right,
poisonous.
but that's
Okay.
because I think because the British, yeah, of course they're much diminished as an economic power, much diminished as a military power. Though they were never much of a military power. They were a big economic and financial power. There's no
And
question.
naval power, naval
Naval
power.
power, exactly. But yeah, they're naval. But in terms of fighting, they nearly always lost their wars. They fought very poorly, whatever the war, Crimea, Boer War, First World War, always fought poorly. But they're very good at espionage. That's their forte. The spying was really always top notch. And of course, they're very good at public relations, and they're very good at manipulating other countries. And it's like,
Yes.
two world wars. They managed to manipulate the Americans into getting into two wars that the Americans really, really didn't want to get into, but the British succeeded in doing it. So I think that there's like certain grudging respect that going together with contempt and loathing they have for the British that they can pull this off. I mean, Christopher Steele, this awful person, he managed to roil the world through his idiotic dossier for 4 years, maybe more than 4 years. And they're doing this. They're doing this all the time. They're manipulating the public opinion in the United States. So I think
What is
that's one of the reasons why I think they just hate the British so much.
Yeah, but it's almost as if it's kind of like with my siblings. Um, you know, we don't get along very well, but we don't remember why we don't get along well. Okay? It just I don't remember, but I know that there's animosity.
Right,
And the thing is that through the century, through modern European history, which Russia is part of, it's these two players that are always going at it. I mean, look at the map of Europe. Okay, some countries are kind of more ancient, like the French, and even Italy isn't an ancient country. It's a relatively new country when you think about it.
right,
Poland comes and goes. Germany gets big and gets small.
right,
The Balkans come, you have these confederations, you have these different sides, and then
right,
all of them, one way or another, are defeated and
right,
destroyed. The Greeks are they mind their own business,
right, right,
okay, and
right,
Turkey's always looking south and
right, right,
east, okay. But
right.
what are the two major countries that are just
That's
always going at it?
that's
It's
right.
Russia and the UK. It's
That's right.
really interesting.
Yeah, no, that's
Meanwhile, all the stuff is
that.
all moving around.
Yeah, no, I think that's right, and I think that that there's a lot of that as to whom the Russians respect. I think it depends on how long you've been around. How many
Yeah,
centuries have you been around and a presence. I mean, like Hungary. Hungary's been around longer than most countries in Europe. You don't think of it, it's a small country, but the Kingdom of Hungary has been around for 1,000 years.
they
Germany.
terrorized their
That's right.
neighbors too. They
Exactly.
terrorized. They were
That's right.
they
And well,
were hell on wheels or hell on
absolutely.
horses.
Absolutely, and then but a lot of other Germans have been only around since 1870. So I think that it does play a role in how Russia, what respect that they show,
Well,
and
and also when you really think about it, there's been an enormous amount of continuity in Great Britain, except well now with their dispensing with habeas corpus and free speech and all of that. That's really depressing to see happen there. But I mean, it really is an ancient country that has institutions that are admired, adopted all around the world. I mean, and a hat tip for that. Okay, I
right,
get that's fair. But the juxtaposition is look what the hell the Russians have been up to. They went from an empire, then they went to communism, then they had a civil war. They had massive bloodletting in the
right,
1940s. Then we can use the Brezhnev motif, of immobility
right, right,
and the the equivalent of like stagflation and all that. And then it all comes down. And then these damn Russians, they come back up again. I
right,
mean, they go through every single political permutation that you can think of, and they're still standing.
right,
That's quite amazing if you think about it, everyone.
right, right. Yeah, no, that's right. But once I think the Russians realize the British can make life very difficult for us because they are very good. They're very good at manipulating others. Look at that. They're out of the EU, and yet they're more influential in Europe than they've ever been.
Than
They've
ever
used
before.
the whole issue of Russia to exert their influence over Europe. They use the issue of Russia to exert their influence over the United States. And so it's kind of infuriating that here they are. They just don't have any of the military power. They're not an economic power anymore. They're not a financial power anymore. And yet they have this malevolent, malign influence. And I think that contributes to this feelings of
And and
anger.
and 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 that and there's the Russia is the organizing principle more
Yes,
times than not. Okay, that's what they focus their attention on. That's what elevates it artificially elevates them in geopolitics. Okay, and well, I think one of the interesting things we're going to see And it's always been predicted. And George and I always try to push back against these grand predictions. But the relationship between the UK and the United States is not good. Okay, it's not catastrophic, everybody. Okay. It's Newsweek in Time, if they're still in business, they'll always have the breakup, the divorce. How many articles we read, George, over the years? Over the years, how
I
many?
can't name them. So many. Yeah, yeah. It's just yeah. It's a regular thing. And then we have a new president and a new UK prime minister. And what do they say? It's a special relationship. It's always been a special relationship. It's very, very special. Yes. Whoever it is, even if they dislike each other, like Donald Trump and Theresa May, intensely dislike each other, they still mouth the nonsense about the special relationship. It's it's not anything that I mean, the few prime ministers, there've been one or two prime ministers who didn't like America. They didn't last so very long. I can only think of Sir Anthony Eden, who I think didn't like the Americans, and he came crashing down very quickly. Edward Heath, I think, is also didn't like Americans. He came crashing down very quickly. Since then, no one has tried it. So every UK prime minister knows I've got to do whatever I need to do to keep the Americans sweet.
And Tony Blair said as much publicly.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, so
Yeah.
no, kind of to top it off here, this rhetoric that's coming out of this so-called coalition of willing, everybody, the coalition of the willing doesn't have the phrase doesn't have a good pedigree. I'd
No,
like to point
no.
that out.
But it's a
Okay.
warlike, it's a warlike call. I mean, when Starmer uses the term coalition of the willing, that's a warlike call. I mean, it's not like coalition of the willing, who's going to help out, distributing bread in in some famine-ridden country. No, no, no. It's a call for war, and that's exactly what
Yeah,
Starmer wanted.
but there's a fly in the ointment. Is the European public's going to go along with this? Okay, that's the wild card in all of this because we see look what they're doing to Romanian
Right.
democracy is it's just an abomination. I mean, this is truly ugly what they're doing.
Yeah.
And what and George, I'm a cynic enough to say that is this a test case?
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah.
Is it the Romanian project? I mean, how
It-
much can we get away with?
yeah.
Okay, because if you want to go to a permanent state of war, you have to convince the public to go along with it. Okay, you have to have nonstop pitched war fever.
Right.
Okay, and you can't have these parties in Romania. No, 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 because it could happen in Germany. It
Yeah.
could happen in Austria. It could happen. It could
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
happen in Italy. Okay, so
And
I think because we heard earlier, when the first round of the presidential election in Romania was deemed null and void. Well, we can if we can do it to Romania, we can do it to Germany. That's part of the
no,
public
no
record.
question. No, no question that they were going to do that. And of course, the thing is that when you cancel an election, cancel a presidential run, you also provoke a reaction from the public, and then you can use force. Well, this is an insurrection. These people are out on the streets challenging the rule of law, and Brussels will be on hand. Well, you need to do whatever you need to do to, make sure
And
that
they're going to call
rules
them
are
Jan
observed.
Sixers. They're going to call them Jan
They'll be the
Sixers.
January 6th. So you can always do that. So there's always the other angle of it is to provoke a reaction from the public, and then you use massive.
And Russia is, of course, behind it.
That's right. And Russia's behind it. And that's why when we're talking about, Bosnia Herzegovina, it looks to me like they're trying to provoke something in
Of
Bosnia.
course.
They want to go
Of
in and
course.
arrest Milorad Dodik and then see how the Serbs might react violently if he's arrested. And then that could be a pretext for a NATO intervention. Well, we got to do something. We got to restore order in Bosnia Herzegovina. So
Of
there's
course.
always, that as a there could be a civil war in Serbia. I mean, where are all these going? These mass protests. Almost every week there's another mass protest. It's supposed to be a democracy, And he's a presidential election. He won very comfortably last time, and yet every weekend there's a mass protest against him. Whatever the issue, there's another mass protest. And you think, well, what's really behind this? Somebody is trying to provoke some kind of a crisis, a confrontation, violence, and then that could be the pretext for some sort of an intervention.
Yeah, yeah. These wicked people, their work is never done.
Right,
Okay,
right,
because they need uniformity. Dissent is not only undesirable, it is not permittable
right.
anymore. Okay, because we have to close ranks. We have to have a military. Sorry, no more 6-week vacations. We're at war. Okay, sorry, no more daycare for
Oh, yeah.
you. No free lunch. Nope, free lunches.
Right,
They're out.
right.
Okay,
That's
as they
exactly.
build larger palaces for the EU elite in
Yeah,
Brussels.
that's right.
Okay,
That's
I
right.
mean this is all done on purpose. It's asked over and over again. Does Macron really think the Russians are going to take the Eiffel Tower in the morning? Well, he wants you to believe that. Okay. Does
Right.
he believe it? That's not important. He wants you to
He
believe
wants
it.
you to believe. That's exactly it. That's exactly it. That's the whole point. You treat the public as idiots. You get them frightened. It's not that hard to get people frightened, and then you get them to give up their freedom, give up their common sense, and sign on to absolutely insane policies. And that it was COVID was a trial run, but now you have the Russian threat, and that's been going on. That even predates COVID. That's really it's 2016 at the time of Brexit. I mean, obviously you had the Trump election. You managed to convince a substantial chunk of the public, of course, all of the media, that Russia is somehow everywhere. Wherever you look, the Russians are there. They're manipulating, craftily plotting, peddling conspiracy theory. Everything is on.
And you
Wherever you
never
go, there's
can
a
prove
Russian,
it. And you never can prove it.
and
It's
you can never
amazing.
prove it
That's
exactly.
how crafty they are.
That's how crafty. You ban all Russian media from the European information space, and yet even so, Russian manipulation, Russian disinformation is more powerful than ever.
The reason why George and I bring this up, because if you look at economic trends in Europe, minus cheap Russian energy, which we always focus on Germany, but it has a knock-on effect for the rest of the continent here. You have to come up with an explanation why living standards are
Right,
worsening.
right.
It's because we're at war.
That's right.
And that's COVID has been mentioned. We have a medical emergency. It's always going to be an emergency, okay? And that
Right,
they tried that. Personally, my own private opinion, I think George agrees with me. This was a beta
right,
experiment, okay, to see how you can mobilize and
right.
suppress society. And they learned a lot from it, a
That's right.
lot,
Yeah,
okay?
yeah.
And I think it's being reapplied again. Again, only my personal
Right.
opinion. Okay.
No, I think so, and I think so, and it was an amazing what they pulled off. Who'd have thunk that a public for a couple of years would accept being imprisoned. It's like under house imprisonment. That on the basis of some an illness from which there was a 99.5% survival rate, and you've managed to get people to be terrified and accept um, house imprisonment. I mean, it's an amazing thing. Businesses were destroyed, schools were destroyed, and common sense was destroyed.
You
And
remember that guy? And I think it was in Australia. They had a CCTV camera in an elevator. He
that's it.
sneezed,
The sneeze, and there was a
and then the
nationwide hunt.
all points bulletin.
That's
This
it.
man sneezed without a mask. We have to find him.
The
Remember
nationwide hunt.
arresting people on a beach
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
alone,
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
wearing a mask in your own car alone?
Yeah. That's right. That's right.
But
That's
see, this is I keep going back to organizing principle. And the only way, and this serves the super state Europeans. I mean, this is a way to deny sovereignty of country. Whittle it away, whittle it away. We need to have the capital in Brussels. Maybe we'll move it to Berlin one day. Okay.
right.
I think everyone gets my hint there. Okay. So, and all of the separate qualities and differences among European countries. You unify it all. It all has to be centralized power, okay?
Right.
And then we'll have 5-year plans.
Right.
And I mean it. They will. And this rearm, what do you think that is?
Right.
That's a 10-year plan.
That's
What do
right.
you think that is? It's a 10-year plan.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. That's right. And someone is going to have to pay for it. And the Financial Times is already laying the groundwork. Time to end the welfare state and time to introduce the warfare state. They're actually putting forth these headlines in the Financial Times. The establishment opinion. Yeah, forget your welfare. No more nice checks for you. We're gonna have a warfare state. And for what reason? Well, Russia. Oh, well, so it's Russia. So you don't even have
When
to explain to
this
them
whole
where's the threat. You just have to say Russia, and already everyone knows, yeah, that's a real threat.
well, this whole circus show that's Looney Tunes on steroids. Another thing this campaign that we're experiencing in Europe. George, it's a way to cover up. So how did this all start?
Right.
Nobody wants to talk about the origin
No,
story. No one wants to talk about the predicate,
no.
okay? Okay. How many people, and I think you and I were a bit startled. Was it Witkoff or Waltz or even Marco Rubio? They mentioned the Minsk Accords, which, like nobody in mainstream media had ever only people like we talk about. Remember that?
Right.
I was just like, whoa. I think it was Waltz. He said, we don't want to go back to the
Yeah,
Minsk
right. Right.
process,
Yeah,
Minsk 3. I
that's
don't know if the public even knows what he's
no,
talking about.
no, that's right. And JD Vance also talked about Minsk during that meeting with Zelensky in the Oval Office. Yeah, but they never spelled it out. But you're right. I mean, and I think that's an important consideration. They have to keep the war going. Otherwise, once the war comes to an end, people are going to examine the origins. I mean, it's automatic. Once something is finished, they're going to go to the origins. Who started it? What were the steps that led to this? And all the talk, the coup in 2014, Minsk, Istanbul, all this is going to be discussed. So, but as long as the war's continuing, that discussion is off the table. So that's another reason why they're very anxious to keep this war going for ad infinitum.
Yeah, yeah. And what's being set into motion, none of these politicians that are in power now will have be held
Yeah,
responsible for it because they
yeah,
just will pass it on. Okay.
that's right.
What a cast of characters. Okay. And I still think they need to reboot Hogan's Heroes because this is what we see. This is it. Okay. And I didn't look up the major's name. I thought about it last time we talked. I don't want to waste time on that. All right, everybody, that was pretty good hour and a half there, almost 2 hours. We put a lot of time into this, guys. So it would be really nice if you know, there he is.
And exactly, and you
What
exactly.
gives?
This is the position that Apple has been taking. That's exactly what Apple says. Yeah, Apple have been putting a lot of time in this, been really thinking hard and really planning and strategizing. I need to be rewarded. That's the position that
Who
he
do you think does the slides?
exactly. That's exactly that's what Apple says. I'm doing all the work. Everyone else is just sort of sitting around, drinking tea or even something a little harder. Well, Apple is doing all the work. So if you have a few bob in your pocket, whip them out into the tip jar. But before that, we are doing our live stream, 10 a.m. Eastern time, 10 a.m. Eastern time.
Apologies for the last time we had insurmountable
Insurmountable, but it
technical
wasn't our
problems.
fault. There was a problem on Rumble, and Rumble actually copped a plea and said, "Yeah, it was our fault." But let's hope there'll be no glitches tomorrow. And then I'm doing my solo live stream on Tuesday. Thank you very much for joining us. And remember, if you like the gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye bye.